Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited about today's conversation because I'm joined by two people I've actually had the privilege of being taught by during my Masters in Advanced Clinical Practice. They're the authors of the new book, Essential Examination for Advancing Clinical Practice, a step-by-step practical guide to clinical examinations packed with tips, insights, and the kind of real-world application you don't always get from textbooks. We're going to talk about what inspired the book, the process behind creating it, and what they hope the clinicians and students will take away from it. Getting started, what sparked the idea for the book?
So it was kind of out of the blue, actually. We got an email from the publishers after we'd had an article published for the Nursing Times online, which was called How to Conduct a Clinical Consultation in Advanced Practice. And the publishers of the book, Scion, contacted us asking us if we'd be interested in adapting one of their existing textbooks, it's called Essential Examination, for the advanced practice audience. And this was on the back of the comments that we'd made in the article about the importance of the service user perspective and narrative in the consultation. So that was kind of what they were first interested in our article, but also they were aware that there was potentially a need for a similar book for advancing practitioners. And so we were really pleased to be asked, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We thought it was a real opportunity at that point and thought, okay, where are we going to take this? So then we had to do a bit of work.
So what was the motivation behind the book?
I think once we decided upon it, Vicky, we kind of, yeah, okay, I think this would be a really good opportunity for students really to produce something that we could convert the learning that we're trying to instill all the time when teaching and advancing practice into something that could be shared and we could point students towards too. But I think the main center point of the book and what we wanted to really convey was clinical reasoning. So not just being able to complete and do an examination on someone, but justify why it's being done. And that being centered upon the service user and what they had told you as a clinician through the history taking. And we wanted to show the links between the history and then why you do what you do in your examination. And I think explicitly laying that out in the book was really, it kind of then focused us, didn't it, Vicky?
Yeah, and I think we'd when we were working together, as I'm sure many other educators have been doing, we've been working away from this idea of rote learning for the physical examination and moving more towards this emphasis on clinical reasoning and using the physical examination systems as a kind of a toolbox of skills and knowledge that could be drawn upon based on the presenting complaint and the patient's own or the service user's own story, really. So, and what we were aware of was that there wasn't really there were lots of books that we could recommend to students, but there wasn't that one book that really encapsulated that completely in the way that we were trying to get there. So, lots of books that talked about physical examination and gave some of the A&P and things like that. But that real sort of thread through from the service user's history, informing the physical examination, was something that we really wanted to be able to provide in one place. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that clinical reasoning really feels like it influenced that structure of the book. And as a student myself, when you're being taught and you're being signposted to all these resources and then kind of picking bits from each and trying to compile this one document, it is just so helpful to have this one document that has everything that can just help you focus on learning what you need to do. With our lectures, I can see both your teaching styles within the book. Did your teaching of students influence how you approach writing the book?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think as educators, I think this is primarily motivated by us being educators because you want to share this and you want to ensure that more widely people can access this stuff that we think is valuable. And we think if people can move away from just learning facts and kind of accumulating knowledge, but actually understanding why, that's what we're trying to get across. And I think the nature of advancing your practice is about better understanding, better justification, and sharing that with the people involved, i.e. the service users, and being able to do so confidently. So definitely thinking about our students and what they need and what they tell us, isn't they? They telling us that they need these things, and we're always slightly frustrated because it's like how to give them all the resources in a written format rather than just what you're saying. But actually, this was an opportunity to write down all that stuff and say, here you go, we can give it to you here.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that when we were writing the book, because we had the basis of the original book on which to build, but actually I think both of us are fairly surprised by how much different it is from that original book. We didn't expect it to be this different, but we're really pleased that it is, because that's what we realized that's what we were trying to achieve. But from our students, we know that they work in such a broad variety of areas. Advanced practitioners can be found in every nook and cranny of the healthcare system, secondary care, primary care, lots of different specialities. And so when we were writing the book, we could really broaden that from the original text and make sure that it would work for everybody in every space that they were in, really. So that, having that come back to us from our students and was really helpful. Yeah.
I think from my clinical experience, particularly in mental health, and with that focus on, like you say, tailoring it for students in some elements, I can see how the layout is really supportive for neurotypical and neurodiverse. I think that was what I found quite different about this book, and why it was quite different to the other ones that we normally are signposted to and the ones that you're getting the information from. It's not as text heavy. It is quite concise on the information that you need. We always love a good colour coding, and it was very clearly signposted, and it just felt quite manageable in the chunks of the information that was being presented throughout the book.
Because once we kind of realised that that's what we wanted to do, we made a deliberate decision to have these sections that were quite clearly to differentiate from each other, and come up with a kind of why this system section at the beginning. So it really helps you to think.
Colouring you were talking about, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, that pink section. It helps you to think, well, why might I need to examine this system given what I've heard from my service user, from their history, and then having the service user's perspective really clearly put there. What they might find, what we might forget as practitioners, they might find challenging about the process itself. So yeah, I think, Emma, that was a really deliberate decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I'm glad it appeals to many different people, because that's how our brains worked. And I think it was, again, being reasoned in how you approach every single system in a similar way. And even if it's not your speciality, that's the whole point. Is it's about breadth of understanding in multiple systems. So if someone comes to you as a service user, you don't have to ignore those things. It's not your speciality. You can competently go to that system, know why you're there, be able to come up from the clues in the history with some theories around what you're trying to look for, and then in the examination pursue that in a way that's kind of, it's enough that you can come away with something useful to then support them in the next part of their journey. But I think just because we've done it the same for every single system chapter, regardless of your profession and your expertise, hopefully it is an approachable resource for that.
Absolutely. And I think being able to support students, trainees, clinicians to get enough information to either make that diagnosis assessment or at least get enough information for that referral is so important. And when you were looking through the book, were there any examinations or techniques that you felt particularly that were undertaught or misunderstood that you wanted to highlight?
I mean, certainly from a neurological system perspective, I think there's often a lot of fear around this. We encounter this when we're teaching it, and because people don't feel it's their speciality often. And so we made sure, even though it was in the original book, we kind of, again, following the same structure as all the other systems, broke it down and made it much more accessible to know why you'd be in that system, what are the kind of theories you might have, the differential diagnoses, we call them, and then what is the core examinations you want to do, and then why you might choose other tests. So you don't have to do things as a recipe, like Vicky said. And that's certainly something I think that changed in this book. But there were some other bits we added, weren't there too, Vicky?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I just want to say about the neurosystem that the Emma worked on that chapter, and it's quite revolutionary, I think. As an educator, I found it quite challenging to teach. Never mind expect students to understand from this incredibly complex system what was necessary, what might be optional, how to approach it. So I think that for me, that chapter's really is quite revolutionary, I think, in the way that Emma's developed it. So that was amazing. But I think the other thing that we did was we thought about the audience that we had, the advanced practice audience. And like I said, they're spread out over all and every aspects of healthcare. And I think the original book was designed for medics, and it was particularly focused on OSCEs, which are the examinations that medics and advanced practitioners often take to assess their clinical skills. But it was also very focused on secondary care, so hospital care. And I think that from our experience and the students that we have accessing these programs, we were aware that many of them work in community. And so some of what we did was to make sure that this was useful for everybody across the breadth and depth. And for example, often the cardiovascular system is often grouped together as cardio and vascular. What we did in this is we made the decision to separate them out so that we've got a chapter on the cardiac system and we've got a chapter on the peripheral vascular system, because I often found students forgot about the vascular aspect of the cardiovascular system. And particularly in community, we deal with a lot of conditions that long-term conditions that relate to peripheral vascular problems. So that was one thing. And then another thing that you may be surprised to know was that in the original book there was no chapter on the ear, nose, and throat, which is quite a big omission for the advanced practitioner, particularly those in the community who spend a lot of time looking at people's ears, nose, and throats, but also in other aspects of healthcare as well, I'm sure. So that was something that we added in, but we were also able to remove things that we knew from our experience and our background weren't necessarily relevant to advanced practitioners because of their base profession. They had a base of knowledge that maybe medical students don't have, that meant that we didn't need some of the things that were in the original book because they would have been covered in their base preparation for their pre-registration training. So yeah, that was kind of also helped us to think about what we'd include. Yeah.
I think that's what I really liked, is I could hear both your voices coming through in the book and the different styles, and definitely the enthusiasm. And that ultimately is so important for me because that's going to help me understand, learn, and kind of go from there. And like you said, it feels like the book is done in such a way that kind of any profession can kind of really pick it up in this area. So it can be used by a nurse, a paramedic, a GP. It's good to kind of have that breadth of clinicians really that it covers.
Yeah, and it was really helpful for me. I was so grateful to be working with Emma on this because Emma's a physio by background. I'm a nurse by background, and I'm acutely aware that the advanced practice space is slightly dominated by nursing at times. And it meant that we could keep each other accountable really about making sure that we were inclusive across the breadth of professionals in the book and thinking about that. Yeah, so I think that was really, really helpful. And of course, we had different backgrounds and different sort of experience as well. So yeah, I think that was really, I'm glad that came across in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a multi-professional text, and because advancing practice space is that, isn't it? And it's not just advancing practice, it's enhancing practice. And the reason we chose the word advancing because it's about anyone wishing to develop and move on their practice, and that's about understanding. And so we want AHPs to do that as much as nurses, and potentially even any other clinician could pick up this book. And we hope it could be used clinically and not just as students, because we do see some real value in having a book when you're in practice to refer to.
Absolutely. And when you find with the book, so there was, I think what I particularly liked is that you have this element of focusing on kind of students, that teaching part. It can be used as that prompting part for clinicians, but also there was this quite strong focus on bringing it back to the patient and kind of reminding them how and what their perception of this is. And I think that's another really helpful element where I think especially students, you can get quite focused on the OSCE part and try and being focused on kind of needing to pass, but actually this can be quite helpful of reminding you that it's remembering that real world application and kind of focusing on really embedding it as part of your practice rather than a kind of focus of passing an OSCE.
Definitely. And we, from the original book, we did remove any mention of OSCE, really. We wanted the focus to be, real world application. What do these things mean to real people? And so that obviously the service user, we've talked about that being fairly central in terms of their history, but also there's a box in every system that just reminds a clinician again that even though this person, of course, needs to be examined perhaps in some way, what are their concerns about that? What are they immediately presenting with that might kind of cause barriers to that examination too? So just thinking about centering that again around that person before you embark on, jumping in and doing test things. So
yeah, absolutely. So what was the process in trying to decide what to include with all the information kind of available from the book it was based on and from your kind of clinical and educational experience?
I think one of the things that we had to kind of realize quite quickly was that we couldn't include everything. And I think we've tried to sort of spell out in the preface and the foreword to the book how the book can best be used and just explain our reasoning really. But so you'll find the chapters have got lots of information about for example, differential diagnoses that might relate to certain clinical findings, but they're not exhaustive by any means. We just couldn't have done that without creating something that was really huge and unwieldy. We don't provide a lot of anatomy and physiology because there's excellent A&P texts out there that practitioners and students will have access to supplement that. But where it's particularly important, the notes section of each system chapter have got the really important bits in that might include some bits of anatomy physiology. So it's actually quite more of a problem of what not to include than what to include. It could be a little bit challenging at times, couldn't it, Emma? So yeah,
and the appendix was a key part of that too. And I don't know how, Amy, you found the appendix.
I think it was quite nice. I think for other resources that I'd used in the past, the appendix wasn't really something I'd look at. I think by the time I focused on filtering through what information I needed and kind of picking out that main information, I wasn't kind of at that part of the appendices. But I think with this book, it just felt very different because it is so concise and it covers, from what I felt, just the absolute basics. You're then kind of signposted that if you're then going to do this, it's in this appendix, and if you want to kind of do this part of the appendices, it was quite nice of how it's kind of layered and structured in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's really good to hear that was useful because the thinking behind the appendices are that they're not kind of just, there if you like it or not, if you feel like it, but they're actually things that are so relevant to every single system that it would have been repetitious to put them in every system. But they should be considered in every system, and so they're there to be drawn upon, and so that was kind of the natural way to include them. So I'm glad that they were useful, and I think it just emphasised that whole approach in the physical examination section of there are some things that you will always do when you examine a certain system. There are some things that you will do based on clues from the history, and there are other things that you might then consider as well. And here's the appendices to guide you with that. So it's all based on that clinical reasoning of, do I need to do this? Do I need to examine, do this special test? Well, let me think about my patient's presenting complaint.
Exactly.
Is it indicated, yes or no, rather than just, it's on the list, I better do it, So, yeah.
Definitely.
And of course, for students, it's part of that OSCE. So I just do it. I do this and then I pass.
I know. And we want that. We want it to be not about recipe learning. Inevitably, you want a book that you can carry around because you cannot remember everything. In clinical practice, you're allowed to refer to stuff. You're allowed to refer to the detail. But to have that reasoning, that's actually what we want to focus on developing.
And I think that accessibility just made it so much different, I think, from other books as well. How do you kind of hope for clinicians in practice and kind of students to be using this book?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I didn't appreciate until we kind of got hold of it was the design of it, really, which wasn't anything to do with us. I have to give the publishers full kind of like credit for that, which is this really simple thing, was it's ring bound, and so it's kind of, it lays flat. You're not fighting with you finding things that you probably shouldn't be using as paperweights to keep your book open when you need it to. So it's I just think it's a really practical book. I hope it's practical because of the content, but it's also practical because of the design. And it's not huge. You can put that in your bag. And whenever I was in practice, I always had a couple of key books that I needed that I could quickly refer to if I came across something that I'd hadn't seen for ages and I'd forgotten about, or I just needed a quick refresher. And I really hope that that's what this will be, for qualified practitioners. It's a little bit of a kind of, oh, let me just have a quick look and just remind myself about that. Oh, I've read that somewhere. Let me look it up. Yeah. So I think that's how I hope that it will be relevant for people who have qualified, as well as trainees. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's what I would have hoped as a student, to kind of have all this information together. But as a clinician now, it's helpful to have something that isn't got half the desk based on it to try and keep it open. Like you say, you can quickly use it, quickly refer to it as needed, and it's just doing everything it needs to be doing, really, when you're focusing on the patient and just doing what you need to do. So starting to kind of wrap this up, if a student picked up the book the night before an OSCE, what would you want them to focus on most?
Okay, well, I probably want to see that there's a link, between the history and, the reason you're about to embark on an examination. If they can take from it and, communicate in an OSCE why they're about to do something, I think, to be honest, it makes it much easier for anyone to kind of then show competence in an examination, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think probably you won't be taking a lot in if you pick up a book the night before your OSCE. It might be more a kind of a superstition or hoping that some good luck will rub off, But I think if they're flicking through this book in a kind of effort to late night panic, that it will just remind them that it's the history that'll tell them what they need to do in the physical examination. That, we use the word clues in this book, which people might find a bit odd, actually, because it doesn't sound very scientific or healthcare-y. But actually, we decided to keep it because it says what we wanted to say. It's a clue that you're being given, and you can follow that in an investigative way, to lead you to, not necessarily a final diagnosis, but on the right path to what to do next. And like I said, we often act as patients in OSCEs for students, and we're giving this history. We're trying to tell you what's wrong, just in the same way that often a patient is actually telling you what's wrong. And so if you pick it up before the OSCE, only one thing goes in. It's just remember to take a really good history and listen to the patient and the service user, what they're telling you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think reminding anyone, no matter what stage you're at, just keeping that kind of focus on, keep looking for those clues. Like, they're going to be there. Keep finding that interest and just keep digging, because usually you'll be able to kind of pick apart and find it. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat. It's been great hearing the story behind the book and kind of getting a bit of a peek and kind of understanding the thinking experience behind that shaped it.
Thank you, Amy. No, and we're so pleased that it is now available to buy, so available hopefully to enhance learning.